I think it's really fitting that a film about how people come together to share experiences that help them heal is made by two people who came together to make this happen. So can you talk about your origin of collaborating on this?
Yeah, thank you all so much for coming tonight and witnessing our film. Jules and I met 10 years ago at our first reporting jobs. We were cub reporters in a newsroom and were randomly sat at the desks next to each other. And we became fast friends. And in the years since, Julian went on to become an incredible writer and journalist and storyteller focusing on Indigenous life in North America. And I went on to become a documentarian and investigative journalist focusing on conflict and human rights abuses all over the world, from Afghanistan to the Saharan Desert. But I had never done anything on my own country. I'm Canadian, and my first year of kindergarten was the last year of the residential schools in 1997. And I grew up not knowing or being taught anything about it. In fact, there was a sense of, this didn't happen. These were actually just schools that were, giving Indigenous kids an opportunity to be educated. That's kind of the framing to this day for many people. So when the news of potential unmarked graves on the grounds of one of these schools broke, I felt gut pulled to the story. And the first thing that I did was text Julian and ask him if he wanted to collaborate on something. And he told me he'd think about it. And in the meantime, I went looking for a nation that said they were going to do a search. And I found an article in the Williams Lake Tribune about Chief Willie Sellers and the Williams Lake First Nation. And I wrote him an email, a cold email, and he called me back that same afternoon. And he said, "The Creator has always had great timing. Just yesterday, our council said we need someone to document this search." So I spoke to council on Zoom, and I got my gear together, and I booked flights to Williams Lake. And 2 weeks later, I was ready to go. And that's when I heard back from Julian.
And I did actually take 2 weeks, in case you guys were wondering if that was true or not. I needed to think about whether I could make a film, which I'd never made a film before. And I needed to think really hard and careful about whether I could make a film about, that. And, that was a really serious consideration. I didn't know what the story was, but I knew that there was a story there. So I took some time to think about it. And eventually I came to this feeling, really, that if I didn't work on this, that I would come to regret it in some way, shape, or form. And so when I called them back, I said, "Hey, about that that film about the genocide that my people went through that nobody knows about, I'd be open to collaborating with you on that." And that's when she said, "Great, I've identified a First Nation that's leading a search, and that search is happening at St. Joseph's Mission near Williams Lake, British Columbia." And when she said that, I was like, I thought that the universe was like, sorry for my language, was like fucking with me. And that's when I told her that that's the school that my family was sent to, and where, to the best of my knowledge, my father was born. So you just have to think about like the mathematics of this for a second. Out of 139 federally funded Indian residential schools in Canada, the only person I ever sat next to at the only full-time journalism job that I ever actually had in an American newsroom happened to be Canadian, happened to also be a documentary filmmaker, and then happened to want to make her first documentary, and what became our first feature documentary at least, about Indian residential schools, and then chose the ones, maybe we should have bought a lottery ticket or something, it's improbable. And I don't know what you make about that, but I now know what I make of it.
I mean, that's interesting because it means you're starting a project with this idea that it's the perfect thing for you to collaborate on, but you're also clearly probably worried about telling it right. So can you talk about the conversations you had and you wrestling with being a participant and your family being a participant in this, and you trying to get the trust of people to be on camera.
I mean, who better to make a genocide documentary than an Indian and Jew, right? But in all seriousness, though, another part of the reason why I had to think about it is that I'm a writer, and writers are basically paid to overthink things. But the real heart of the thing is that film in general has a very bad record when it comes to Native people, and documentary especially so. The first documentary ever made, arguably, is Nanook of the North. It's made by Robert Flaherty. It's considered an all-time classic. Robert Ebert, or whatever the heck his name is, has a whole thing waxing poetic about it. It has this scene where they hunt a seal or whatever, and the seal hunt is actually fabricated, and so is seemingly everything else actually in this documentary. The Inuit, it's a documentary about the Inuit, and they're wearing their traditional garb, even though actually at the time they didn't dress like that. They interact with all these modern technologies like a gramophone, and one of them famously picks up the gramophone and bites into it, which they knew what these things were. They're portrayed essentially as these primitives who are going to be steamrolled by modernity, and therefore, you can infer, are not able to tell their own story, and probably not even to govern themselves. And on top of all that, the filmmaker actually fathered a bunch of kids when he was in the North and just left them up there. I mean, it's truly despicable, wild behavior. And this is arguably the first documentary ever made, and it's made about us, broadly speaking, us. And when you know this kind of a thing, and you're potentially going to make a film about your own people, it makes you pause. That's for sure. And what I came to learn is that is one possibility of the camera. There's this possibility that the camera is this imperial imposition. But there is another possibility of the camera, and that is the possibility that the camera tells people that they have agency, tells people that their story matters. And the central linchpin in that is not the camera, it's the person behind the camera, the people behind the camera. And over the first year of filming this documentary, I almost never appeared in front of the camera. I was solely collaborating with them behind the camera. But after seeing her and our director of photography, Chris Lamarca, interact with this community, go 6 feet down into a grave as it's being dug for someone who committed suicide on the first ever day of Truth and Reconciliation, as you saw in the documentary, go down death-defying trails to a rushing river that if you fall in it, you actually do die. To all sorts of different things, to moving in with the late Chief Rick Gilbert for 3 weeks before he went on that incredibly courageous journey to the Vatican. I realized this other possibility that the camera could call people to be who they wanted to be seen and perceived as, and in this case, a very consequential moment for our people. And I saw time and again people rising to that possibility, that other possibility of the camera, because the people who were behind the camera were creating that opportunity for them, and for them, including myself. And so, ultimately, I think that really transformed my whole relationship to the thing, and made this into a truly deep and meaningful collaboration.
Emily, you want to speak to that too?
Yeah, I think it was very clear to both of us from the beginning that to tell this story right, we had to live it. To get under the skin of it, we had to be in the community and to earn the trust and the intimacy that you see on screen. And some of those choices really came from the collaboration between the two of us and our broader team. But what was really beautiful about working with Julian for me was that I came from a more solo practice, and so did he, and we had to deeply trust each other and learn from each other and be willing to be open to learning from each other, which transformed the way I was shooting. So, for example, Julian would say something to me like, "This is a community living on the edge of death." Well, what does that mean? It means that Jules attended 10 funerals during the making of this film. And I attended several myself because these are communities that are suffering from the highest rates of suicide and addiction and cycles of violence as a direct consequence of what happened at these schools. The past for them is present. The death toll continues to climb. And so we needed to incorporate that in the visual language. So, it means seeing that shovel running through the dirt as Willie's digging that grave. It means another thing that Julian would say is this is a post-apocalyptic world for Indigenous people. So conveying that through the landscapes and the eeriness of, the burn of the trees and moving slowly through them, or seeing that it's a 2-mill town and the kind of extractive industries that engulf it. And so that collaboration was foundational in the lens in which we were coming into the world. And then it was about a lot of time, love, and compassion to build those relationships over the 2.5 years that we were shooting, 160 shoot days.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, like, at the end, your grandmother doesn't want to be on camera. I'm guessing that was the deal. But, like, you have this
I didn't want her to be on camera in that moment either.
And you didn't. Okay, so, and yet... you show a visual of the landscape that just seems to make it, what she's telling you, even more powerful. Are those the kinds of things that to you like really make the film leap beyond what it could have been if it was just a template true crime doc?
Well, I don't think either of us would have ever made a template true crime doc. I mean, count me out on that. I think that, listen, obviously you saw the film. I come from a people in a place that really struggles with addictions and things like that. And to me, the way that creation feels to me, it's like a high, to be honest with you. And it is one of the most incredible highs that you can experience as an individual. But then to share that with other people, wherein it's not just your, because writing is a very solitary thing. I'm sitting there at my desk, like pulling my hair out and my eyes out, and then once every 30 days, I'm like, oh my God, this is the best. But to then share that with someone who has a whole bunch of technical and other skills, visual skills that I barely know how to press record on anything. And once I actually completely forgot to press record when we were in the field on the audio, and it was like actually a really hilarious moment because the meeting seemed consequential at the time. And to share that with Em, and then with Chris, and then with Kellen, who our producer, and our editors Maya and Nathan, and our composer Molly Obamswin, who brought, I should say, like an incredible score to this film. I think gets overlooked often.
Incredible.
And for the things to build across conversations, across time, to try things together, and to finally seemingly crack the code, only to figure out the next day that it doesn't work at all. It's an incredibly fulfilling thing, and that was a amazing experience to have. That also, in a certain way, made it more possible, just from my perspective, to not be staring at the bull that we were about to ride, which is like making a movie about your family's trauma and your people's genocide.
We would like to open this up to questions if you have any.
Hi, thank you for this incredible film. I was just curious, at what point did you decide to include your father and his story in the journey of the film? Was that from the beginning, or did that emerge along the way?
So when I signed on to be a director with Em, the understanding was not that I'd be a participant or that my family's story would be included at all. Em and I were originally just going to be collaborators behind the camera. But in the first week of filming, Charlene, my auntie, brought me up to the barns, and you see it in the film. She asks me to help her tell the story, and the backstory on that is that Charlene's a very powerful woman, and when she says something, you do it. And so she told Em, bring Julian to the barns and bring your camera. You're going to want to film this. And then what happened, right? And what I'm saying is that like I didn't think that I was going to be in the film. I was pretty sure I didn't want to be in the film, but clearly Charlene knew otherwise, right? So I think at many points throughout all this, the circumstances really determined my action much more so than my own agency. I mean, even just the origin of the film, as you heard. But one thing that I should add here is that I moved in with you don't really see this in the film, but I moved in with my dad for 2 years during the making of this thing. Very glamorous, right? At the age of 28, a bachelor, I move in with my dad in a little Navy town in Washington and live across the aisle from this guy who left me when I was 6 years old. And we start making breakfast for each other. And, I hang out while he carves and he like makes fun of me while I try to write and stuff. And, it was incredible experience where we grew a lot closer and we had a lot of conversations. Many of them were not like the conversations you saw in the film. But it became very clear that he had this unresolved thing around all this, that he had questions that he wanted answers to, or at the very least he wanted to be able to ask. And I felt like I wanted to help him with that because I also was dealing with my own stuff around this too. I mean, not as big as his, I should say, but like, I have my own feelings and my own inheritance of this thing. And helping him with that was also a way for me to, deal with my own stuff, and was also a way for me to try to understand what it is that my cat, who I also deeply love, is carrying with all of that. And I guess, on some level, hoped that if we went about this in the right way, that it would ultimately be a healing thing rather than a harmful thing, which is what I very much feared. And to creator's good grace, so far that is what it has been.
Quickly, can I ask how is he? How's he doing?
He's good. What should I say? He went and saw his mom a couple weeks ago, which was not something that he would have done. Maybe you could probably tell that based upon the film until recently. He's got a residency at Evergreen State College near Olympia, Washington. He's making art, which is the thing that he loves above all, including his family.
He's our biggest fan on social media.
And he loves us on social media.
Posts everything, likes everything.
He's addicted to it just like me and you.
Okay.
Hi, I want you to see if you can talk about the process of connecting the dots between the historical facts, the community, and the leaders, and also the other events that occurred together. How difficult was to come up with the whole investigation and then proceed to filming and then editing so much material?
Great question.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, first, it took a long, long time. We went through thousands of documents. The thing about these records in the investigation is that, first of all, they're incredibly hard to access. And then once you are able to access them, they're in about 5 different places. And it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. You're looking for the one letter where the priest says something about the kid who died. And then you're trying to find the death record that matches around the date when that letter was written to see if there was a body and whether it was buried. And that process that Charlene and Whitney were leading was also one that we were working on, right? And we, tracked down that priest that Charlene spoke to on the phone. So all of these things happened over the full 2 years. So concurrent to shooting everything was an intensive investigation of every type of documentation that we could access. And it was very much in the vein of investigative reporting. You just go through everything and take copious notes, and the wall that they put together came much later once they had gathered enough spreadsheets and ways of putting things together. I think what was most surprising for us was that we started this film thinking that we were heading towards finding potential bodies in the ground, that this was about unmarked graves. But what we ended up finding out was that the real story, a story that, by the way, has not been reported until our film, is about what happened to the babies who were born at St. Joseph's Mission, who were either adopted out into white families, forcibly aborted, and in some cases placed in the incinerator, where their ashes were then, buried in the ground or dumped into the river. And so we didn't realize at the time, of course, that would line up with Julian's very own family story. So that was really a revelation that was happening in real time.
We have time for one more.
I won the lottery. So the two questions I have. One is, why is it called Sugarcane? And the other one is, I've been to Kamloops twice, usually like that halfway point to somewhere further north. But I've been there, and so I also want you to talk about, there's that kind of tourist industry there, but the bright lights that we could see on the other end of the lake, where is the touristy area in relation to the reservation on the lake? But sugarcane is the first question.
Okay. All right. So for the second question, I think what's interesting in particular about the geography, I'll do that one. I'll let Jules talk about sugarcane, is that there's a lake called Williams Lake in the town called Williams Lake. And on one side of the lake is the town, the settlement. And on the other side is the reservation, Sugarcane. And so this is a cow town on the old Caribou Gold Rush Trail. This is a town of cowboys and Indians and Indian cowboys where, you know, the bastions of empire of the Catholic Church are still salient in the missions and the old churches as much as the traditions and culture of the indigenous peoples are being revived. But the town remains segregated across this lake. And so when you're looking across it and see the lights, you're seeing the settlement from the perspective of the res.
Yeah, sorry, I got a little thrown off by the Kamloops reference, so I didn't really understand the question. The sugar, so it's not the same place as Kamloops. If you keep going north, though, you've driven through Williams Lake for sure. Like if you're going to Prince George from Kamloops, you go through Williams Lake. Sugarcane is the name of the res, as Em said. I don't even think I need to talk now. But Sugarcane is the name of the res. And I guess one additional thing to say about that is it's the colloquial name for the res. So people, it's called the Williams Lake First Nation, as you might have heard in the documentary. But people who are really from this world, they call it Sugarcane. And in the sort of Salish narrative tradition, the place that a story comes from and the name of the place are usually intertwined. Like sometimes a place name actually contains something about the story of that place. And so what's significant about us choosing to call our documentary Sugarcane is it's set on the Sugarcane Indian Reserve, but we're also saying is that this is the story of this place, which in a Secwepemc, Statlian, Salish way of marking your history in your oral tradition and on your land is a very significant thing to say. We're basically saying this is the story of this place and of this community, and we hope that not just in documentary film, but also in the legends of this people, which loom large and that we still maintain. That this film is part of that.
And it feels like the perfect title. And I can't thank you guys enough.
Thank you so much. I wish that we could have time traveled to this conversation back when we were trying to convince everybody to let us call the film Sugarcane.
Well, it does have this elemental kind of like quality to it, right? It feels intimate.
It does, and yet everyone told us we couldn't call it that.
From your lips to everybody else's ears.
We'll go back in time then. But thank you for making this wonderful movie about the weight of history and the power of people and the strength of land and tradition and healing. So, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much.
Kuk's Churchill.